Welcome to another Friday craft. I am so excited because we're making homemade hair bows today. So we're going to learn how to make them in all different sizes. For example, we'll make some little baby ones and some like bigger girl ones or adult ones and some toddler sizes. I've also made like my own hair bows to wear to match my daughter. So it's going to be so fun. Eventually in the future, I want to do an embroidered hair bow. We're not going to do the embroidery today. We're just going to learn the structure of the bow, but in another video, I think I'll show you guys this embroidered hair bow because I think it is so gorgeous. Now we will be using a sewing machine today, but if you don't have a sewing machine, you could hand stitch these bows. They would just take you a lot longer. So definitely if you have a sewing machine, I would recommend using it. Now our materials for this project are pretty simple. You're going to need the fabric that you want to make your bow out of. You're going to need some fabric scissors, clips to clip your bow onto, or headbands if you want for like a baby hair bow, and then also just some string, sewing machine or needle and thread if you're not using a sewing machine, and a hot glue gun. That's all we're going to need to get started. We are going to be making so many fun different sizes of hair bows today, but we're going to start off with the baby hair bow. Now I am cutting a rectangle out right now, and throughout this video you'll watch me cut these out and see the different dimensions on my mat. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't lining it up with the true corner of the mat, and so what you're seeing here is actually 1 inch smaller than what it looks like. So this rectangle is actually 6 inches by 4 inches. So I'll just tell you the dimensions of the rectangle, and that's what you're going to want to listen to. So for our baby bows, we need one rectangle that's 6 inches long and 4 inches wide. Once I had cut that rectangle out, then I could take it and fold it in half. You're going to fold it and you're going to make sure that the right side is touching and the wrong side is showing. Then we're going to make a simple straight stitch and connect the side that is not folded. Now make sure you back stitch to start and stop your sewing, and this will just make sure that it's nice and secure. Once you've connected the two sides, you can trim off any excess string and then go ahead and turn your rectangle right side out. Next, we are going to fold that in half, and you actually want the seam on the outside. So you should see a little line, a little seam before you go to sew this. And then you're going to go ahead and do another straight stitch, just connecting the non-folded side. Again, making sure to back stitch when you start and stop your stitch. This will just keep it nice and strong. It should look something like this when you're finished. Next, you can take that and trim off any extra strings. This will just keep your bow nice and clean and keep strings from poking out. And then you can go ahead and turn that right side out. Next, you are going to gather your bow. I like to kind of make the middle stick out and then bring the two sides in. And I'm just going to connect this bow by tying it with a string, and that will hold it in place while we make the center for our bow. So this is kind of what the bow is going to look like before I've tied it with a string. You're going to gather it however you want. Again, I make the middle poke out and then the two sides come in together. And I like to use embroidery floss or twine to tie my bow rather than thread, just because it's a little bit stronger and more durable. Really, once we make the center for the bow, that will also hold the bow in place, but this just reinforces it until we can get the center of the bow made. And you're going to want that just right in the middle, and you can maneuver it, you can kind of play around with it until you get the look you want, and just make sure that it's centered and that your bow ties are even on each side. For the center of the bow, you're going to cut out a pretty small rectangle, and we're going to be folding that rectangle into thirds and then using hot glue to secure it. So up to this point, you're done with the sewing machine for the baby bow. The amount of sewing you have to do on the sewing machine is pretty minimal and pretty simple. This little center, once it's glued and folded into thirds, will wrap around the bow. So I just put a line of hot glue and then folded one side, then put another line of hot glue and folded the other side, and so it's in thirds, which makes it so that no seams or edges are showing. And then I hot glued it to the center of the bow and then wrapped it around to the back. And I'm going to go ahead and glue one side to the back of the bow, but only one side, and I'll show you why. And you can trim that down so that it ends right in the center of the back of the bow. But you're going to want to wait to glue down the other side until we grab our clip. Okay, once I glued down the one side, I have this little tail hanging off, which is exactly what you want. You want to have some excess because next you're going to take your clip and glue it onto the bow. Now, if you want to do a headband, you would just do the exact same thing, but instead of the clip, you would put the headband here. Next, I'm going to open the clip and I'm going to pull that tail through the inside of the clip and glue the edge down to the bow. So this goes on top of the inside of the clip, so that only the top of the clip is hanging out, and this makes it really nice and secure. So you're going to want to, basically you're gluing the clip through the little center wrap. I made two because my baby has long enough hair for pigtails now, which has been so fun, so I like to make little matching bows. Okay, next we're going to move on to the toddler bow. Now this bow is going to have little tails on it, not just the bow tie part of it. So I'll show you how to make that. I started by cutting an 8" by 6" rectangle, and then from there did everything exactly the same. I folded it in half, sewed it, then turned it right side out, trimmed off my excess string, then folded it in half again and sewed that, making sure that the seam was on the outside, and then trimmed off those excess threads, turned it right side out, and scrunched it up like a bow. Now this bow should obviously be a little bit bigger than the baby bow because it is meant for a toddler. You can kind of see the size difference. Of course, if you want your bow to be bigger, you can change the dimensions of it. Next, I used my string to go ahead and tie that, just like I did on the baby bow. Now this is where it gets to be a little bit different because we're going to make the ties, or the ends of the bow. I cut out a rectangle that was 7" by 3", but if you like really long ties, you could make this a little bit longer. If you like shorter ones, you can make it shorter. Next, I folded that again, so my right sides are showing and my wrong sides are facing out. Next, starting at my folded corner, I'm going to draw a 45-degree angle, and that's going to go from my folded angle to the outside unfolded edge, and I'm going to do that on both sides. They're going to face opposite ends, and then I'm going to sew those. So I'm going to start by sewing from the folded edge, and then once I get to the end of my angle, I'm going to turn or pivot my fabric and continue sewing until I get about halfway. I don't want to go quite to halfway because I do want to leave about 1 or 2 inch of a gap for me to turn this right side out. But then I am going to flip the fabric over and start once again on the folded edge, sewing along that 45-degree angle. And then once I get to the non-folded edge, I will once again pivot my fabric and begin sewing. I'm going to sew once again almost to the center, but not meeting up with the other stitch on the other side because I do need a gap to be able to turn my fabric right side out. Once I have done that, I can cut off any excess string, and then I'm going to cut off the excess fabric on each side. So my angles should look like this, and once they do, I can take my fabric and turn it right side out. Now, one thing that really helps with those little edges, because you do want your little corners where your angle is to be pointy, and so I like to take a pen and stick that in at the very end of flipping it inside out or right side out, and just really straighten out those corners and make sure that they're poking out just like that. And it just makes your bow lay really nicely and gives it a very finished look. Now you have the option to sew up that gap in the fabric, but honestly, it's going to mostly get covered by your bow center. And so as long as your gap isn't that big, you don't really have to go through and sew it if you don't want to. That's going to attach just below the bow tie part of the bow, and we're going to start by attaching them with string. So once again, I'm just using some embroidery floss, tying those together. And then, just like we did on the baby bow, we're going to create a center for it. It should look something like this before we put the center on. And I am just going to go ahead and cut another rectangle, not making it too big. There's different looks. So if you like your bow ties to be a little bit more spread apart and have a wider center, you're going to want to cut a wider triangle versus a smaller one if you like your bow ties to look a little bit more full, and then you might want a really skinny center. So it's kind of up to you depending on the look that you want, but I'm going to attach the clip the exact same way, so gluing it on and then attaching the back side of it through the clip and using hot glue to secure it all. So I attached that clip the exact same way that I did the baby bow, and this is how it turned out. I think it's so cute. I really love the bow ties on this one. And I think it's the perfect size for a toddler bow. You could make 2 of them for pigtails, or if you prefer ponytails, you could do 1. You could also make bows like this and use them for keychains, or we'll make some bigger bows. You can make a big bow for your front door, because I know that bow wreaths are a big thing right now. You can even sew a lot of bows and make like a garland, which I think I want to do for Christmas this year. And maybe I'll do a bow garland tutorial. That would be kind of fun. One thing that always helps with any sewing project, making things lay nicely, is to iron your fabric. So that is definitely something I would recommend if you see any wrinkles in your fabric. Now we're making the adult size bow, and this one is 8 inches by 11 inches. Now, for the bow rectangle, I'm doing everything the exact same way as the toddler bow. Again, make sure when you do sew those edges together that you have this seam facing outward, so that when you turn it right side out, because I've made this mistake before, you want the seam to be hidden. Next, I am going to go ahead and secure my bow center, and then I will be making the tie part of this bow, which is going to have different dimensions than the toddler bow. So for my ties, I am going to cut a rectangle that is 11 inches by 5 inches. Now again, if you like the look of really long ties, you're going to want to cut that rectangle quite a bit longer. It's totally up to you as far as personal preference. Next, we're going to make our 45-degree angles and begin sewing. Once again, we're going to sew it the exact same way that we did the toddler bow. Then I'm going to take that tie and I'm going to once again tie it to the bow, create my center, and attach the clip or headband to it. Again, personal preference. Probably for an adult bow, I would imagine you would want to do a clip, but you could do a headband as well. Now again, for the center, if you like the fuller bow, make sure that you do a smaller center. You could even do a smaller center than I did, because the bigger your center is, the further it's going to spread and squish down your bow ends. So that's kind of personal preference, but you can achieve the look you want by just altering different sizes and experimenting. I've made bigger bows, smaller bows. I've really experimented with it, so you can totally change the dimensions, but this is the basic structure of the bow, so you can make them in any size. We have, again, our baby bows, our toddler ones, and our adult ones. And one of my favorite things to do is make matching bows for me and my daughter. You could even use the same format to make bow ties if you have a son, and then the entire family could be matching, and I think it is such a fun craft. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are able to make your own hair bows, and I'd love to see pictures and see how they turn out. So let me know in the comments down below how your projects went, and if you have any questions that I can answer, I would love to answer them down below. Also, let me know what kinds of projects you're most interested in seeing in the future. My name is Jenica, and I make content designed to help you find your creativity and be resourceful. So we do a lot of DIY crafting, decorating here on this channel. We try to keep things very budget friendly and reuse, recycle whenever we can. And if that's something that's interesting to you, then go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I love this community, and I would love to have you be a part of this community. So come join us here every Friday. I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much for watching.